Hello, Internet, and welcome to episode number 288 of the Comic Watchers Show. I'm Matt. Chad had an emergency this evening. Hopefully, he's able to make it and everything's okay. But we're here on a special night this week with novelist and comic writer Alex Segura. Alex, how the heck are you?
I'm good, Matt. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here in the
Absolutely. So,
live.
yeah, man, we're here. So you've written a lot of comics. You've written several novels, including Alter Ego, which got a lot of good praise and awards and
Hmm.
all that great stuff. So, but now you are here with, excuse me, a deep dive into the world of Daredevil, the illustrated
Yeah.
history. Yeah, that came out on November 4th, so you can get your
Hmm.
copy now. And Alex, so tell us a little bit about why now was the time to do a deep dive into Daredevil.
Well, I mean, in terms of just public awareness, I think Daredevil's popularity in the mainstream is probably hitting a peak, with the show and the past shows and everything kind of building up together. But um, the coincidental thing for me personally was I was working on a Daredevil crime novel at the same time, an adult novel for Hyperion Avenue and Disney and Marvel. And that's a whole new story that's a little continuity adjacent. It's not necessarily in the main comics continuity, but obviously pulls a lot from it. But at the same time, Insight reached out and said, we'd love for you to do this. And
Mhm.
part of my research for the novel was rereading and reading every Daredevil comic from the beginning, which includes the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, all the Miller stuff, all up to the present day. And so I was kind of doing the research part already, just with a different mindset. I was doing it with the thought of like, let me just jot down any cool ideas that I can weave into the novel or inspiration I could weave into the novel. And then it became a little bit of that, but also a lot of just research. What are the high points? What are the big beats of Daredevil's comic book history? Because the illustrated history doesn't really tackle the media stuff like the film or
Right.
the two shows. It's very much grounded in the comics, which I think is great. It's like just the source material, and it's not steeped in the world in that it gives you a zoomed out and publishing history of the character. You find out the story points, like this is when Daredevil moved to San Francisco, or this is when his secret identity was revealed. But it's also very much a publishing history of the character. Like these are the writers, artists, colorists, letterers, and different creators and editors who've had a great influence on the character. And that I love that kind of stuff as a reader. Those are the kind of books I get just for fun to learn about what's happening under the hood. um, and it was fascinating to see and to research and to talk to like so many of the players that were involved
Hmm.
in Daredevil. From it's got new comments from folks like Brian Michael Bendis, Ed Brubaker, Charles Soule, Chip Zdarsky, Annie Nesenti, Dan Chichester, J.M. DeMatteis, like Carl Kiesel, a lot of the major players who
Murderers
contribute.
Row.
Yeah, and Mark Wade, just great people. And I'm lucky to know a lot of them as friends and colleagues just in the business. So it was I think a little bit easier than maybe for someone who was coming into comics from just a journalistic standpoint. Like
Mhm.
I've interacted with a lot of these folks already. So it was fun to just reach out and say, hey, I'm doing this book. It would be great if you could contribute. And I think the unifying perspective I got from all those comments was, wow, I can't believe I have this gig. Like I can't believe I'm stepping in to work on Daredevil. And that was the one thing that almost everyone said. Um, and some creators were either not available because they've passed on, like Denny O'Neil,
Sure.
or just, we just couldn't get a hold of because the deadlines were really tight. So in those situations, I just dug through a lot of existing interviews. It's not like any creator that's worked on Daredevil has been quiet about the work. There's so many great resources out there. And so it was nice to dig through those archives and that history. A lot of it published through Marvel, like in their own, not fanzines, but like Marvel Fanfare and things like that.
Right.
Um, and kind of seeing what they thought of at the time. Especially like I was really pleasantly surprised to read a lot of great Denny O'Neil interviews from the era, because when he stepped into Daredevil, it was really because who's going to follow Frank Miller? You
Right.
have this seminal run, Frank Miller, Klaus Janson. Who in their right mind is going to step in and play the same position as Babe Ruth. You know, like it was such a
Mhm.
historic moment for the character, and he pulled the character out from being. Though we can get to this in a second. Like I think the
Yeah.
perception of Daredevil was that he was kind of diet Spider-Man or like very Spider-Man light. Though I will
Well,
dispute that.
I think it's
Yeah,
fair to say. I'm
yeah.
sorry,
I
I
think
didn't
in
mean
the
to interrupt
long
you,
run.
but
But then you have Frank Miller and Jansen come in and totally inject this noir sensibility to it, and it's like it was almost like a reboot of the character. So
yes.
from Denny's perspective, it was like, well, if anyone's going to do it, I guess I'll have to because it's such a thankless job. But I think to that greater point, I think you see the elements of what will become the Daredevil of Frank Miller start to appear long before Miller shows up, like with Gene Colan, like his very chiaroscuro, like kind of shadowy, uh, cinematic art style. That was there, even if the stories were maybe still a little more bombastic and like early Bronze Age. And even Roger Mackenzie's work as a writer before Miller even stepped in was very horror tinged. So I think the pieces were there. I just don't think there was a creative vision to like put them all together and say Daredevil is this kind of character. That didn't really happen until Frank and Klaus came in my opinion, which could be
No,
wrong.
I grew up like most people. I grew up thinking of, there's two eras of Daredevil. There's pre Frank Miller and post Frank Miller, and that's
Right.
still very true. But in my mind, as a young know-it-all, I was always thinking, okay, well, those pre Miller stories suck because it's not Frank Miller, it's not crime noir,
Hmm.
blah 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 blah. And then you go back and you read that stuff by Steve Gerber for a great example,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
it's so much fun.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
the same Daredevil that you will eventually come to know and love, but he's definitely not Diet Spider-Man, to borrow your turn of phrase.
No, he's not. He's not. And I think one of the things that I found fascinating is that throughout the Daredevil's publishing history, up until Miller, it wasn't like a primo gig. It wasn't like Jerry Conway did it, but now Jerry's a legend now. But at the
Yeah,
time, he was like the 19, 20-year-old upstart who was doing a lot of stuff. He was writing Iron Man. He was kind of testing things out. And Steve
yeah. He was
Gerber,
basically taking what he could get.
taking what he could get. Steve Gerber very much in the same mold. And Roger McKenzie was doing a lot of the second tier titles. So Daredevil was very much like a B title. And so it allowed those creators a lot of flexibility because similar to like Claremont on X-Men before Dark Phoenix, no one was really watching what they were doing. There were so many books that had to go out, so
Mhm.
much churn, so much oversight that I think in that era of Marvel, the creators had a free reign to kind of push the envelope a little bit in a way they couldn't with like Spider-Man or the FF or the Avengers because those were the books that I think editorial or corporate or what have you at the time was looking at much more closely. And so Daredevil I think benefited from that because there were just a lot more big swings happening.
Well, definitely, and I mean things that we take for granted, like you couldn't have moved Spider-Man to San Francisco,
Right.
but you can Daredevil,
Right.
and why
You couldn't
not?
pair him up with the Black Widow. I mean, because
Yeah,
he was already involved with Gwen or Mary Jane or whatever. But you could with Daredevil, you could try new things and kind of see what stuck because he worked in multiple contexts. I mean, he's always going to be a Hell's Kitchen street level vigilante. That's always going to be in his DNA. But even now, you see the Wade run took him back to the West Coast, took a very,
yeah,
I wouldn't say lighthearted. One of the runs I enjoyed revisiting the most was Mark's run because everyone's like, oh, it's the funny run. It's not that funny. It could be really dark.
yeah.
It's just presented in a way that seems lighthearted, but there's a lot of pathos there. There's a lot of tragedy and struggle. And it's really Matt Murdock putting up a front to be like, I'm going to be a smiling daredevil. And that, the story progresses, you see that's kind of part of the problem that he's
Right.
convinced himself that he's got to be this happy go lucky guy and it's not working.
Well, it's a facade, and the
Right.
cracks begin to show, and then you get to the end of the run, and everything, of course, because it's Daredevil, falls
Yeah.
apart.
Right. As they do. Yeah.
So what is your history with the character, Alex?
My history with Daredevil, I think,
As both a reader, yeah.
yeah, as a reader, I was a big Spider-Man guy in terms of Marvel comics. Spidey was the first Marvel character I really latched onto, Spidey and the X-Men. And I remember Daredevil, for whatever reason at the time, I would go to the drugstore to pick up my comics at the spinner rack. Daredevil was kind of like the B title. Like if there was no Spider-Man around or no X-Men and no DC characters I wanted, then I'd get Daredevil. But I remember that one of the first issues I picked up was part of either the build-up. I think it was the build-up to the Last Right story, which now is called Fall of the Kingpin. But it was by D.G.
Mm-hmm.
Chichester and Lee Weeks. And I remember looking at Lee Weeks' art and just being blown away because it had this very, it was inked by Al Williamson, a legend,
Yeah.
and just improved anyone he partnered with. But his art style was very John Buscema, very draftsman like, and
Mm-hmm.
he brought this reality to Daredevil's world, which seemed much more complicated. And as a kid, you always want to read above your age range, so
Oh yeah.
whereas the Spidey stories were kind of straight superhero stuff in the main Amazings title at the time, Daredevil felt a little bit like you went from basic cable to HBO. Like it wasn't an R rating in any way, but it was much more mature. And I hadn't figured out I hadn't gotten to Vertigo yet or to like mature readers' books, but it felt like Daredevil was a really messy character, very complicated, very good-hearted and smart and driven, but also loaded with conflicts, whether they were religious, personal. I mean, the guy, like I've said this a few times, but the guy is a lawyer who believes in justice, but then he dresses up like the devil and punches criminals and drags them into prison, breaking the law. Like he's breaking the law too. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
duality to him that I find really fascinating. And Matt's personal life was never as clean cut as like Peter Parker's or Reed and Sue Richards. Like, I mean, you knew Pete was going to be with MJ at the time. They were going to be married, and that was going to be that. With Matt, there was a lot of tumult, and I didn't know the baggage yet. I didn't know like I hadn't read Born Again. I hadn't
And
really read.
is their baggage.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot that's gone on. I hadn't read Ed Nocenti's fantastic run, but that issue, which featured the Hand, and I think ends with a great image of Ghost Rider showing up, who I wasn't like super into Ghost Rider, but it worked in that context.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Really, was what reeled me in. And after that, the Last Right storyline started, and I'm a, this sounds very basic, but as a comic reader, the art has to really pull me in. Like I love story. I'm a writer myself, but if I'm not jibing with the art or vibing with the art, then it's harder for me to enjoy the comic. And Lee
Mm-hmm.
Weeks to me is a master storyteller, not just a great artist. Like his covers are great, but when you look at the book and you don't even read the captions, you still know what's going on and it's done really well. He's just got great sense of camera angles and expressions. And so even then at like 12 years old, I was like, this guy's money. Like he just knows what he's doing. He's just a great artist. Um, and little did I know that Daredevil had such a long history of great, great creators and would continue to have a great legacy of creators. And it took me a minute to realize that, Fall of the Kingpin, Last Rites by Chichester and Weeks is a response to Born Again. So when I finally read Born Again, I was like, aha, now I see I see what's going on here. And then I went back and read the Miller run, and you could also see a lot of parallels between Mazzucchelli and Lee Weeks in terms of art
Mm-hmm.
style and how they draw Matt and how they draw that world. So it was really fascinating to now, while researching for this book, reread those books as well in the right order. And then just all the great stuff that happened after. There's a lot of like hidden gems in the Daredevil world. Like the Wade run, I think I don't know if it's safe to call it a hidden gem. I do think people do a disservice to it if you write it off as just a funny run. Like it is
Yeah.
light in some ways, but it's also really dark. And so there's a lot of that, a lot of eras that I think like before Miller or even after Miller that have been kind of overlooked because of the bigger hits.
Well, I only relatively recently read that Denny O'Neil run for the first
Hmm.
time,
That's a great
and
example. Yeah.
he's got a great example. Like nobody talks about it, right? And
Right.
of course, when people are talking about Denny O'Neil, they're naturally going to gravitate towards Batman anyway. But
Yeah.
um, like you were saying, he's got the unenviable task of following Miller, and those first 5 or 6 issues, like basically through issue 200, are him kind of picking up loose story threads that Miller left
Yeah.
over, and then he gets into his own stuff. And once he
But then
really,
he really cooks. Yeah.
then he cooks,
Hmm.
and it's a totally different but still tonally uh, tonally similar style to Miller, just in a different, just about different things. Without him aping Miller.
Yeah, and I think that was I can't speak for Denny, but obviously it was part of his. I think that was some of his intent. Like he didn't want it to feel like, oh, I'm trying to riff on Miller, even though I think a lot of the Miller run was tied to conversations that Denny and Frank had. I'm not talking about specific story points. I just
Mhm.
think that there was a dynamic relationship there. But I think Denny always brought this journalistic and almost zen vibe to his stories, whether it's Batman, whether it's Daredevil, whether I think it's, the question to me is a direct evolution of his Daredevil run. Um, and then it really kicks into high gear when this young artist named David Mazzucchelli steps in and takes over the reins on that book, and they're really off to the races at that point, and that's when Miller comes back, and then you have Born Again. And so I think, yeah, the Denny run definitely gets overlooked because it's bookended by the two Miller runs, but I think it's worth reading it through. And I think for a long time it was out of print. You could only find the single issues, and now it's been digitally available for a while, but it really
Mhm.
is the kind of run that I think gets short shrift a little bit. And so it was nice to write about it and really kind of emphasize how what a thankless job it was to step into the writer's seat after Miller left. But then he did a great job, and he did it with a different flavor, and it felt like it didn't negate what came before, but it
No.
added to the tapestry.
Well, and it wasn't afraid to deal with heavy issues like suicide.
Right. Yeah, that's a dark issue. That's
That's
really
a very dark
intense.
issue.
And Lady Deathstrike shows up for her. She makes her first appearance during the Denny run.
That's right, she does.
Yeah.
I forgot
Hmm.
about that.
Yeah.
And then after that, you have the great Ann Nesenti run. Which, what are your thoughts on that run? Because it's held quite, some very high esteem.
I love it. I mean, I have great respect for Annie as a writer and as a person. I think she's supremely talented. I'm lucky to call her a friend. I think she also used the other side of the coin in terms of like Denny stepped in because no one wanted to take over for Miller. Then Miller came back with Mazzucchelli and put this great kind of period to the end of the sentence. Like, really, Born Again is not a reboot. It's like it's the end. Like that's the period that Daredevil could have ended there,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
company-owned characters don't end that way. So Annie and John Romita Jr., another legend, came in and had to basically build the character up from zero. And she did it in such a New York way. You really feel like you're in Hell's Kitchen with Daredevil, and
Mhm.
she does a great job with the villains. She introduces so many great villains, most notably like Typhoid Mary, Bullet. I think Bushwhacker. I don't know if Bushwhacker was her creation, but definitely like a lot of great new villains, and still emphasizing the importance of the Kingpin and what he has over Matt. And and she really leans into how you know limited and shaky his relationship with Karen is. Like you just had this very intense moment in Born Again. That doesn't mean that everything after is going to be smooth sailing, and especially the
Right.
triangle between Karen, Typhoid Mary, and Matt. And so, just talking about the novel for a second, probably the runs that influence the novel the most are the Annie Nesenti run, the Dan Chichester run, Bendis, and of course Miller. You can't Miller and Denny I kind of group together. You can't not be influenced by those runs, but those are the big ingredients of the novel.
So, getting back to the book itself, is it
Yeah,
structured chronologically, or do you kind of utilize like topics and themes like Catholicism or the law to examine the character, or
it's
maybe a
chrono.
mixture of both?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. It's a little bit of both. It's definitely the main through line is chronological. You start with
Okay.
Stan Lee and Bill Everett, then you get to you keep going, and there are sidebars. We do a sidebar on the different costumes. We do sidebars on the villains, sidebars on the supporting cast. And we lean into the creators that helped define the character, like Wally Wood, Stan Lee, and Bill Everett. Obviously, Joe Orlando, Jerry Conway, all the great writers and artists. Gene Colan, deserves I think a lot more credit than I think he even gets to this day. Like he's obviously
Agreed.
a hugely important part of the early Marvel days, but I think in terms of Daredevil in particular, he's a huge pillar in that pantheon. He's just so important to the look and the feel of the characters, and you can see a lot of what Miller did riffing off Colin in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Gene Colan is one of those artists that, I mean, most people when they first bring him up, they're going to say Tomb of Dracula, but they don't
Right.
realize just how wide a variety of comics he really touched on in his career, like Captain
He had a really
America,
long
yeah,
run on
Daredevil.
Batman, Daredevil. Like, his Batman run was much longer than I first thought, and then you see that DC put out 2 collections of just his Batman stuff. So
Hmm. Yeah, which, by the way, kids, if you haven't read that stuff, you definitely need to.
yeah, I think pre late, Bronze Age pre-Crisis Batman is
Hmm.
pretty wild and
Yeah,
interesting.
he's making time with the vampire chick. You can't
Yeah,
go wrong.
Nocturne. Yeah. What's she up to? I haven't seen that character in a while.
The last time I saw her, I think she was a throwaway character in an issue of Suicide Squad.
Oh, bummer.
Yeah,
It
so it
happens.
goes.
Yeah.
Um, but getting into more modern, and I say modern, I use that term very loosely because I'm really referring from the 1998 era on.
Right.
Um, but there has been a succession of writers, starting with Kevin Smith and then Bendis,
Hmm.
and then Brubaker, et cetera, who have taken Daredevil on as a challenge, as a badge of honor, as you kind of alluded to earlier, that
Hmm.
really continues to keep the character's profile raised at a certain level. Do you feel like at some point that bubble is going to burst and we're not going to have a good Daredevil run all of a sudden, or
Uh,
are we going to keep seeing like high quality stuff? Because at
I
some
think so.
point, your rule of diminishing returns states at some point there's going to be a bad run, but at the same time, we haven't hit it yet, and it's a little bit awe inspiring.
Yeah, no, it is an amazing run. Particularly, I remember when the Bendis run was happening and Bendis's run was ending, and I was like, who would dare step into this run? Like, it's like definitive run, reinvigorated the character, brought it back to its noir kind of hard-boiled, gritty roots. And then Brubaker came in and did that as well, but just with a
Yeah.
different flavor. So I think that the difference between Daredevil now and Daredevil in say 1970 or 75 is that it's no longer a B-list title. It's one of these priority titles that you always want to put your best talent on because there is that expectation of it's got to be great. And,
Yes.
I think Chip in particular recently did a couple of years ago did the impossible in that he wrote a run of Daredevil that didn't feel like it was just riffing off Miller. It's hard to write the character without, he
Yeah.
invoked Miller, he honored Miller, he played with the toys that Miller set up, but it felt tonally different and was still great. And I think Charles Soule did something similar too. So it's really like how do you make your run stand out and feel different while not canceling out the stuff that came before? And so I'm not avoiding your question. I mean,
No, no,
look,
no.
bad runs happen. Like it can happen, But I think the audience will speak its mind. And for now, Daredevil's on a hell of a run in terms of creators,
Yeah,
and it really
I mean,
hasn't
we're
gotten. Yeah.
again picking up at that Kevin Smith run that started in 1998 at Marvel with Marvel Knights. I mean, you're talking
Hmm.
about nearly 30 unbroken years of just quality run after quality run.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't see that, but it's great.
You never see that. So, um, what artists other we've mentioned Gene Colan and of course Miller himself and Ramita Jr. But what dark horse candidate artists do you feel like have left a good stamp on the character?
Oh, interesting. That's a great question. I think not a dark horse, but Marco Cicchetto on Chip's run was great.
Yeah.
I think George Jorge Fornes did a few issues of Chip's run that I thought were fantastic. I think the guy was born to draw either Daredevil or Batman for an extended run. He just draws it in a very almost it's Mazzucchelli, but it's not Mazzucchelli. He's not
Hmm.
imitating Mazzucchelli, but he has that very same stark style that I think I'm drawn to as a reader. I really liked what Aaron Kuder was doing. Another guy that I think about a lot, and this is another underappreciated run, is the J.M. DeMatteis run, which was very, very brief. And I think JM was brought in because maybe he was pigeonholed as the psychological writer because of the stuff he did with Spider-Man, Craven's Last Hunt, The Child Within, which are some of my favorite Spider-Man stories. But he was basically brought in to kind of put the pieces together, like the Jack Batlin stuff, the Matt Murdock stuff, so Matt could then be Daredevil again, and it wouldn't be this disjointed thing post Fall from Grace. But his run with Ron Wagner was really underrated, and Cary Nord had a great run with
Mm.
Carl Kiesel and Joe Kelly, I believe, that alternated, that overlapped with Gene Colan's final run on Daredevil when he came back and did a run with Joe Kelly. But Cary Nord's first big gig was on Daredevil, and he did a nice job. I think maybe deadlines got a little intense towards the
Hmm.
end there, and he wasn't able to keep going. But trying to think who else. David Mack, I think, is not underrated. I think a lot of people think of David Mack when they think of Daredevil, but he's one that comes to mind a lot.
I would
Yeah, who
personally
else?
say Alex Believe.
Oh, of course. Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to
Yeah,
find like below the
but he's
radar.
not
Alex
Dark
Billy.
Horse.
No, yeah, that's the thing. He's not a dark horse. Like,
Yeah, he's there
I'm not
for
going to say Joe
100% of
Quesada
the
because he's
Bendis
not a
run.
dark horse candidate. So
But yeah, David Mack, we think of covers, but he did the interiors for that four-parter about Frogman
yeah, he
that
co-wrote it
Bendis
too.
wrote.
Exactly, and he introduced Echo. So
Yeah, and he introduced Echo. So yeah,
hmm
kind of important.
yeah.
So so did you find it? What was it about the character that you found surprising while you were researching this book that maybe you didn't know or consider beforehand?
What did I find surprising? I'm always amazed by characters that have run a long time, like decades and decades. And obviously, a lot of these characters have had their stories rebooted and rehashed and reimagined in some way. And a lot of characters, writers just tend to ignore stuff and move on and kind of write around things that are problematic. Not problematic in the social sense, but just like story wise, like, oh, this
Mhm.
character doesn't act this way anymore, so we're just going to ignore this. But I think with Daredevil everything seems to still count. Everything kind of happened. Obviously, times change, and he wasn't Daredevil in the '80s because he would be like in his 50s now. So it's different. The sliding time scale affects the stories, um, but I think everything can still cohesively happen. You can read every issue of Daredevil and feel like you read one big story. Obviously, there's style shifts, tonal shifts, visual art styles change, lettering changes, coloring changes, you're going to see that, but there's still that sense of this natural through line, which is hard to do with like Spider-Man. You obviously have big seismic shifts like Brand New Day, and things like that really
Right.
reboot the sensibility.
You also got
Um,
4 and 5 titles per month to keep track of.
yeah, it's just like so much stuff. And I remember as a kid trying to get all the Spider-Man stuff, trying to figure out like, well, this happened in Web of Spider-Man, but it's not reflected in Amazing. So, putting them in order and trying to figure out the story. But the benefit of having that one singular Daredevil style title with some limited spin-offs and not a ton of like guest appearances is that you get one story for the most part.
Yeah, I can definitely see that
Yeah.
because there's not an endpoint. Like I read somewhere before, and my memory doesn't serve me well right now because I can't remember where I read this. But if you take Amazing Fantasy 15 as your starting point and bookend it with Amazing Spider-Man number 200, where
hmm
Peter Parker confronts the burglar, you've got one big arc. And
Um,
basically, I,
yeah.
it's iffy, but thematically, it closes the book on that story that started in Amazing Fantasy 15. So I can kind of see where it's coming
I
from.
could see that. I mean, as someone who read those issues like not recently, I read them when my daughter was born and she's 6 now, but
The
I
older you
started
get,
from
the more recently that is.
yeah, I read from Amazing Fantasy on, and I think I caught up almost to the modern day of that time.
Wow.
And the thing you realize is, yeah, as long as Amazing is the main title, it does feel like it's one singular story, but that's not a long time. Like by
Yeah.
200 of Amazing Spider-Man, I'm pretty sure Spectacular Spider-Man has already launched. There's
Hmm.
definitely already been the Spectacular Spider-Man magazine. There's Marvel Team Up, which is a whole different creative team, but it still works. I think that still works. I could see
Yeah.
that.
But
It
with
definitely gets much
Daredevil,
more
like you said,
complicated.
it's kind of like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
No, no,
interrupt.
no, you're good.
Um, but like you said with Daredevil, it's one long continuous thread that doesn't feel like it's stopping and or
Right,
has an endpoint yet. I
right.
mean, you could, like you said, you could make the case that Daredevil could have ended at the end of Born Again, issue 233,
Hmm.
but it doesn't. So
No, yeah.
we
I
just
mean, they're
get to
not going to
keep
end.
going.
That's what I tell, I am a longtime comic book reader. I'm obviously a creative in the field. I'm also, I guess, somewhat of a historian having worked on this book. But, what I tell folks when they get frustrated at certain runs, it's like, your time will come again. Like, you can take a break and buy something else and wait until the creative voices change and it's more to your liking. Or go back and read the stories you loved because they all count. Like, just because there was a crisis or a big event that
Hmm.
negated the story, you still have the comics.
Yeah, they're all imaginary stories anyway.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
To paraphrase Alan Moore.
Yeah.
Um, so, uh, what are some other characters that you would perhaps love to? Now that you've got this experience out of your system with
Hmm.
Daredevil, who are some characters you'd like to do a similar deep dive with?
Oh, I'd love to do Spider-Man. I know Insight has already they put out a great one by my friend Matt Singer that is fantastic, and I love reading that book. But I would love to do the X-Men. The challenge with the X-Men is the opposite of Daredevil, is that there is just so many titles. Like, you have the core Uncanny book or the main X-Men title, which becomes Uncanny, and that runs solo up until New Mutants launches. But then once New Mutants launches, there's like miniseries, there's new books like Excalibur, X Factor, and that's just like we're just in the 80s at that point, and you haven't
Yeah,
even talked about like Age of. So it just like mushrooms out, and there aren't reboots per se, but there are definitely like alternate timelines, alternate histories and futures. So many characters that come from the future to save the present, and so on. Um, but I have a real fondness for the Claremont run, the original run. So I think there's something to be said about an illustrated history of like the Claremont run. That would be fun, or
yeah,
including stuff like Excalibur and New Mutants, and maybe noting what was going on in X Factor, or actually X Factor because it's Wheezy, so she's was Chris's editor, so that would be fascinating to read as well.
yeah. You could definitely wring a whole thick book out of that era.
Yeah, for sure. And there's so much great art, like that's just as important as Chris's story is the artist. Like, you start with Dave Cockrum and then go to John Byrne, back to Cockrum, Paul Smith, Romita Jr.,
Romita
Silvestri,
Jr.,
Jim
Sylvester,
Lee, and then
yeah,
that's just the original run. You're not talking about Sienkiewicz or on New Mutants or Alan Davis on Excalibur or
exactly.
any of the amazing fill-ins like Art Adams and people like that.
So suffice to say, there's a lot of lore to
Yeah, but
X
it would be
Men.
awesome to write that. Yeah, that would be a blast.
Very cool. What about DC characters? What ones would you be interested in digging into in this capacity there?
Oh yeah, I mean Batman. I feel like Batman's probably been done, and I have a few on my shelf of various kind of Batman history type books. But I thought there's a great one. No, why am I blanking on the name? A friend of mine wrote it. Sorry, now I have to
No, you're
know.
fine.
Yeah, Glenn Weldon, who works at NPR. He wrote.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm looking at that book right now on my
yeah,
shelf. I know exactly which one you're talking about. It's too far away for me to read the title.
yeah, The Cape Crusader. Yeah, it's a great
Yes.
book. It's a pop culture history, which I find that stuff fascinating because it's not just Batman in the comics, but it's Batman in TV and movies and radio and everything else. But I think a straight kind of illustrated comic book history of Batman would be great, and I'm sure it probably exists, so I shouldn't like presume. I would personally love to write one for the Legion because I'm a big Legion fan. I've become
Ooh,
one over the last 5 or 6 years, just reading pretty much everything up until the new stuff that's happening with Josh Williamson and the Superman books, which I'm very intrigued by. Um, but I think that's a property that's fascinating because at one point it was going toe to toe. with Uncanny X-Men
Hmm.
toe to toe with New Teen Titans in terms of
Yeah, under
popularity.
Paul Levitz's shepherd.
Yeah, yeah, which is a great run, and I'm a big fan of the 5 years later run by Giffen and the Beer Bombs and a lot of other folks. But
That one starts out. That's a very challenging run.
oh, for sure, yeah, it's not an easy lift. So you really have to go in. I went in ironically with not a lot of knowledge of the Legion. I was like, what's the worst place I could start? I'll start with 5 years later, and that really made me appreciate it a lot more because I was taking so many notes while reading, going into like Wikipedia and character profiles to figure out like who's Reap Daggle? Like, who are these characters? Like, because none of them use their code names until much later after Giffen's gone. Um, but I think it's a really fascinating property. It's really interesting in the way that a lot of editorial maneuvering hurt and helped. Like, Paul Levitz came up with that time trapper solution for Superboy when Crisis happened and Superboy
Mm.
was erased.
Hmm.
So he created the time trapper situation where there was a fake Superboy, and then Giffen had to introduce Mon-El and have Mon-El be the stand-in for Superboy because they weren't allowed to use Superboy anymore. Then you have Zero Hour rebooting everything. So there's a lot of like, where did it
Whew.
break? Like, where did the property? I don't know if it broke. I think it's really. I'm curious to see what they do with it now. But I think the challenge is like this property was going toe to toe with these big franchises. Like, how do
Yeah.
you get that back? That's I think an interesting book, but also an interesting challenge for a publisher.
Well, and I think they tried it. They tried
Yeah,
to make something. They've tried several times to make it new, and unfortunately the Bendis run did not work out the way DC might have hoped.
yeah, it was beautiful though.
It
I
was
mean,
looked gorgeous.
yeah,
That Ryan
yeah,
Sukar, wow.
yeah.
And the redesigns of the characters, and
Very cool.
they've lain dormant until very recently. But you got Joshua Williamson fixing
Yeah,
to kick off a new arc
it'll be
next
good.
year, or a new volume. Um, and yeah, like you said, I would love it if that and Titans became cornerstone books for DC
Yeah.
again, because they have the capacity. They've
hmm
been that in the past.
Yeah, for sure. I think people love those properties. They're
Excuse me.
they're in. It's one of those things like this, particularly with Titans. It's one of the teams that people know, even if you're not a comic fan, you know who the Teen Titans are. So
Yes, even if it's just from Teen Titans Go, which
yeah,
is
which is
one of the
fine. Like
greatest
that's why
shows
you
ever.
want. Yeah, it's so good. My kids love it. So
So, you said you did not. Getting back to Daredevil, you said you didn't touch on the movie or the TV show in this book, and that was
Mhm.
because you wanted to focus on the publishing history and everything. But what are your thoughts on Daredevil in other media?
I love the net. I mean, I really like the Netflix show. I was really keen. I enjoyed Born Again a great deal. While the novel is not in that universe, like that Daredevil TV universe, it is very tonally similar. So if you're
Mhm.
coming to the book, the novel, as a fan of those shows, you won't feel completely out of place. Um, I mean, I can't say I love the Affleck movie. I don't want to. I watched it once when it came out, and that was fine. It was very
It's
much
fine.
of its time,
Yeah,
so I don't like to yuck anyone's yum or be a hater. It just wasn't for me. So, but definitely the TV stuff was great. Was at its worst very good and mostly great. The fight scenes were well choreographed. It hewed pretty close to the source material, which but twisted things around in a way that was interesting to me. Um, I'm really excited for another season of Born Again to see what they do with the character and what they do with the supporting cast.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, it's the same thing with I think comic fans are driven to be almost like it's almost like sports teams. Like I have to watch it because it's my character. But if it doesn't like resonate with you, you still have the books to read. So
well, and I mean, we tend to be protective over our
yeah,
characters,
for
right?
sure.
Like, what's the number one complaint amongst fans is, oh, they didn't get it right. Well, what's
Yeah,
right? What's right to
yeah,
you may not be right to me. Um,
exactly.
so let's have grace and enjoy what we've got, because there
I mean,
was
there
a
was a
time,
time, yeah, there was a time where this all seemed like a fantasy. If I went back in
yeah,
time and told myself like you're gonna have a Moon Knight show, you're gonna have a couple Ant-Man movies, there's gonna be a Peacemaker show, Hawk Girl's gonna be in the Superman movie, Guy Gardner's gonna be in the Superman movie, like I just wouldn't have believed it.
no,
It just wouldn't have to have that level of quantity, like there would be multiple Avengers movies, like it's a golden age for media adaptations of comics, and
it
so
is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we are lucky to be
Yeah.
living in it. So, yeah, the next time somebody tries to yuck your yum or yuck somebody's yum, just remind them of that.
Yeah. 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 I mean, yeah. There's a lot to choose from as well, too. So.
Absolutely. If you don't like Batfleck, you can hang around and watch Robert Pattinson.
Yeah. So many Batman options. Yeah.
So many
They're
Batman
good.
options. But well, getting back to Daredevil one last time.
Yeah.
Well, I say that we still got like 20 minutes if we can if
Hmm.
we can make it work. Um, what the Catholicism
Hmm.
is a very very big theme throughout Daredevil. How do you see that resonating with the character in terms of his duality?
I think the core duality for Daredevil, like I said a little bit before, is that he is so entrenched in his belief in justice and the legal system and everyone deserving a fair shot. But on the flip side, he also has chosen this life as a vigilante to kind of push through his belief in justice. So there's an irony there. And then you throw in the Catholicism, the weight of the Catholic guilt. Um, I think it's really the guilt is the key element of Catholicism that affects Daredevil. This sense of regret, the sense of having failed, the sense of not doing enough, and this sense of disconnect with his mother, with his father who's gone. And I think it weighs on Matt. And I think that's really, he's a very conflicted character and he's very complicated. Nothing really comes easily to him, and he's messy. I think that's the word I've used a few times already. It's just like he makes bad choices. I think in the interest of doing the right thing. He tries really hard to do the right thing, and in that quest, he harms his personal relationships, whether romantic or friendly. He destroys his professional relationships to make sure he saves the day or does the heroic thing. And so that's the challenge. And I think the Catholicism is a big part of that. It's a part of, justice, vigilantism, Catholicism. Like those are really big elements in the Daredevil, I guess, formula, if there is one.
If there is one, that's right. Um, so you get this character, and he's as multifaceted as they come. He's a uh, beat upon Catholic boy, so to speak. He's a lawyer.
Hmm.
He's a vigilante. He's sometimes a good boyfriend, sometimes a bad boyfriend,
Yeah, not great.
depending
Yeah,
on the
his batting
writer.
average is not high. Yeah.
But he all these things come together, and he's Daredevil, and I feel like these are, like you said, those inherent contradictions are what make the character stand out amongst the pack. Am I onto something here? In your experience researching for this book, do you feel like I've missed anything, or we have missed talking about anything that really makes Daredevil tick?
No, I think what makes Daredevil compelling to people is that he's complicated and he feels real. He feels three-dimensional. He makes mistakes, he makes bad choices. He is innately a good person trying to do the right thing, and that is super relatable. And I think that's why people are drawn to Private Eyes, like the Tainted Knight, the hero that's trying to do the good thing but has addictions or vices or problems in their history that make them make bad choices in the present. And I think Daredevil is very much like that. I mean, there's that great story, A Beer with the Devil, um, by John Romita, that very encapsulates Daredevil in a great way. Daredevil Yellow is another book that I forgot to mention, but
Mm.
it's there's so many ways to approach this character, but at the core of it every time is like this guy wants to do the right thing, is trying to do the right thing, but is also willing to sacrifice things to get there. And sometimes that creates major problems for him. Like the fact that, his identity didn't become public because somebody, only one person knew it. Everyone knew Daredevil was Matt Murdock. Everybody. So it was bound to happen. And I think what Bendis does so well there is he weaves you through this mundane, almost mundane underworld character who figures it out and uses that power to leverage himself up into the top of the underworld. And I remember reading those issues as they came out, and it just felt like, wow, I've not read anything like this in a long time. Like it feels like all bets are off. Like, oh, the Kingpin's you slash the Kingpin. Oh, Matt's identity is out there. Oh, Black Widow's back. Like it just felt like boom, boom, boom. Like he was just on fire, and Mali was the perfect choice for that art. So yeah, I think what makes Daredevil popular is that he's relatable and he's super powered, but he's not super powered in the way that like Captain America is, or obviously Iron Man, or like Avengers level heroes are. He just feels like a guy. Maybe he can hear you having your phone conversation 2 blocks away, but he's still got to fight you like a regular guy. You know, he's still got to be Batman in the street. You know?
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah.
So, one last question for you, and this is kind of just a flight of fancy on my part.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh, you've got your ear to the ground in the comics industry. What writer is that has not written Daredevil before that is cooking today? Do you think would do an absolute bang up job on the character?
Wow, that is a good question. Who would do a bang up job? I would love to see Chris Condon do it. I think he's great. I think he's really talented. Um, he had a great run on Green Arrow that I think was
Yes.
underrated. I really enjoyed that run. Let me look at what I'm reading. Sorry to be that
No,
guy.
no, no. I would be with you. But yeah, that Green Arrow run by Condon is fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, he's the one that comes to mind.
And also that Texas Blood.
Yeah, no, I think he's got a great crime writing style, particularly crime comics. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, you know, Rom V, I think would do a great job on Daredevil. Um, you know, I would love to see someone like Kelly Thompson take a stab at Daredevil.
Ooh.
I love what she's done on Absolute Wonder Woman. I think she's always great. Um, yeah, who else would be good? Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot
Okay,
of great
those are
writers out there.
definitely
I
some
feel like
top shelf
yeah, just
choices,
top
and I
yeah,
would
just
be
top of my
intrigued by
head.
all of
So
them.
yeah, I think they
So
would each bring something unique to it, and I think it would be cool.
yeah, most definitely. Well, if anybody out there at Marvel is listening, you know who to tap next. So do it. Um,
Yeah.
all right. Well, Alex, thank you so much for your time. It's been a
Thanks,
great
Matt.
conversation.
Yeah, always good. Always a pleasure to be on the
Always.
show and excited. I
Yeah.
appreciate the support.
Yeah, absolutely. The book is Daredevil: The Illustrated History. It's on sale now. You should absolutely pick it up because it's awesome.
Thanks, man.
So, all right, Alex Segura, thank you so much for your time. Chad and I will be back on our normal day and time on Thursday. I don't know who we're talking to, but it's somebody pretty cool. So until next time, get out there, support local art, support local music, local comic book shop, all that good stuff. Whatever you do, just bring some joy into the world. Positive vibes everywhere, man. We'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody.